In a documentary class, I was the DP for the project. The documentary was about these surfers in Michigan living out of this bus that they turned into a home. We spent like the whole day with them. That day is probably my favorite memory. It's funny because like you come here for education, but in film and media, it's really about what you do outside of the classroom. Being on the lacrosse team and being a film major at Calvin, it really resonates because a lot of the guys on the team, they saw me as a leader. I can use those abilities that I learned on the field, and I can use them off the field in the classroom. Through that practice, I was able to build a portfolio, and through that portfolio, I was able to get an internship with the Grand Rapids Gold. It was a really cool opportunity for me and to work with the Nuggets G League affiliate team. To me, it was through meeting some of my best friends, working really hard, and giving it everything that you have. The effort that you put in is how good your college experience is going to be.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Wiltskin, and I'm grateful to close out the 2026 January series with you today. I want to share 3 groups I'm particularly grateful for. I'm grateful to our underwriters and our donors, who you've seen indicated on the screen throughout the series. Their support of this series is because they want to give back to our community, and they know learning and continued curiosity makes our communities better places. In particular, I'd like to call out Baker Bookhouse and Publishing, Holland Home, Howard Miller, the Meyer Foundation, Outfront Media, and the Doug and Maria DeVos Foundation. Many of these underwriters have been supporting us for many, many years, and they make all of this possible, the things you see here and all the things behind the screen. Please join me in sharing our appreciation for their contributions. I'm also grateful to you, our audience, for those who tackled daily accumulations of snow outside and still showed up in person, to those who kept remote sites going even through winter storms, and to those who joined us all around the world, even when we've had a few technical hiccups. You've always been there and encouraging us, and I'm deeply grateful for that. And I'm deeply grateful for the many hands and hearts behind the scenes who make all of this work every day. Our catering team, our communications team, video production. There are 4 different cameras always working every day, making all of this work. Lighting and sound, the bookstore, the Prince Conference Center, Karen Sape and her amazing class of students. So many people across this campus make this what it is. I also need to give a special shout out to Emily, Anna, Hannah, and Shirley, whose contributions to this series make it even better than I can imagine. The gift of this series is that you get to take this learning with you. Keep talking about what you learned this month. Keep reading. Keep asking questions. You can see how much this means to me. And above all, please keep being curious. Thank you.
Michael does such an amazing job at curating the series, and I'm grateful to him as well. Well, today is the 10th and last day of this season's January series, but it is going to still be a day of discovery. So each year, the January series is given as a gift by the Calvin University organization to our global community. We have an audience online and in person that can exceed 5,000 to 10,000 people a day. And there will be over 80 to 100,000 people who will see this series across the year. Calvin is reaching the world. And we give this gift because Calvin believes in the value of education, because we see it in the classroom every day, and we actually see it in our audience every day, and we get messages back from our online audience. I wonder if there's anybody in the audience today that has been here all 10 days. Look, wonderful. As our gift, we have an autographed copy of Sabrina's little book for you that will be back at the bookstore. Please go and ask for it. That's our lottery, Christian Reformed Lottery. The January series continues to raise the bar with guests we bring to campus each winter. And Calvin is thrilled to bring you remarkable people who are doing remarkable things. And today we get to continue that with a brilliant philosopher, author, and runner. But first, Bryn Ellenbecker, a psychology major and business minor, is going to open us with prayer. Bryn.
Good afternoon. I invite you to bow your heads and pray with me. Dear Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to listen to Sabrina Little and for being able to hear about her experiences and her unique perspective on how living your life with the lessons learned from sport and moving our bodies, the bodies that you have blessed us with, can be a wonderful thing in keeping perspective in our lives and in staying connected with you, God. We thank you for bringing us all here safely and in health on this very cold day. And we ask that you open up our hearts and minds upon listening to Sabrina, and we pray that you bless our time together and allow us to learn today so that we may apply the things we hear today to our daily lives and to live more intentionally with gratitude and strong Christian virtues to ultimately glorify you. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you, Bryn. Our speaker today is going to ask us to consider a deceptively simple question. What kind of people are we becoming through the practices we love? What kind of people are we becoming through the practices we love? Sabrina Little is a philosopher and an endurance athlete and an award-winning ultramarathon runner. But she is perhaps best known for the way that she brings moral reflection into conversation with ordinary embodied life. She serves as an associate professor of philosophy at Endicott College, where she teaches ethics, ancient philosophy, and the philosophy of sport. She is the author of The Examined Run: Why Good People Make Better Runners, a book that draws on the classical tradition of virtue ethics to challenge common assumptions about achievement, suffering, discipline, and success. And rather than asking only how to perform better, She asks a deeper question. How do our pursuits, athletic and otherwise, shape our character, shape our loves, shape our sense of what a good life really is? Across these 10 days, we have heard from men and women calling us towards understanding and repair and stewardship and beauty and courage and care for the community. Sabrina Little helps us gather those themes at a level of daily practice where ideals meet limits and where wisdom is formed not in theory alone, but through our habits. Today, she invites us into what she calls an examined life, one marked by attentiveness, humility, and hope. Let's give a warm Calvin welcome to Sabrina Little.
Thank you so much for having me. I've had the great fortune of interacting with a lot of Calvin people over the years, students and alumni and professors, and they're all people that I hold in really high regard, so it's an honor to be here. I'm going to start with a story. In early October of 2016, I broke the navicular in my foot 3 weeks prior to the Trail World Championships. The navicular is a small, low vascularity bone at the top of the foot. It heals slowly. If you don't know anything about the navicular or its standard healing time, that is a really fortunate thing, and I'm happy for you. Distance runners often know about the anatomy in our feet and our lower legs for a bad reason, which is that we sometimes hurt them. The only person who knows foot anatomy better than a podiatrist would be your friendly local distance runner. In any case, I broke my navicular through a combination of an imbalance which had developed in my stride and by running too many miles on hard surfaces. Having had little experience with broken bones, I did not detect a growing pain that should have been cause for alarm. So I caught the injury after it was too late to recover it with a few days of rest. The body is resilient. If given the space to recover, I did not give it that space. This was a pitiable occurrence, so close to the Trail World Championships, and I was embarrassed to report my withdrawal from the team. I borrowed my sorrows in physical therapy appointments where I went through the arduous process of rebuilding my body back to strength, and it was a frustrating season of life. If you've ever been to a physical therapist's office, you know what I mean by arduous. The difficulty is not in daring deeds or impressive feats of strength. It's in subjecting oneself to seemingly trivial movements and trusting that they matter. Unless my physical therapist is listening, in which case I never thought that the exercises were trivial. Trusted you all along. At physical therapy appointments, I was assigned a series of tiny exercises to perform over a long period of time. I performed ankle rotations and single leg work. I corrected my stride asymmetry with hamstring curls and clamshell movements. I did this one movement where I launched repeatedly off the ground in this running motion while pulled back by a sling held by the physical therapist repeatedly. And I did these movements repeatedly for weeks on end, restarting upon completing them. I was Sisyphus rolling boulders uphill. But while I did not often detect progress from week to week, I trusted that the investments I made were not in vain and I would be strong again. And this was true. It took about a year, but eventually I returned to full form. In my year of return from injury, I learned a lot about resilience, the virtue of recovery. I learned that small exercises make a big difference and that bouncing back is a considered choice. I learned that recovery, like all forms of training, is a hopeful act. And this is unsurprising since philosopher Nancy Snow writes about resilience's intimate connection to hope. Substantial hopes provide us with mental resolve, they help us not to lose heart, and they enable us to maintain effective agency in the face of setbacks. Maintaining agency is important. It means you continue to choose and act in light of the possibility of renewal, even when there's little visible evidence of progress. In my injury recovery, I learned that patience wears sneakers, not slippers. If I could stay patient, actively patient, the kind of patience that would diligently perform the exercises I was prescribed by my doctor, I might become the athlete I was before the injury. I might become an even better athlete. The resilience I gained in my process of renewal would make me a stronger, more adaptable athlete, and this would pay off both in the process of training and within competitions. So what does it mean to use sports as a laboratory for virtue development? For starters, we should acknowledge that this is already happening. Whether or not we intend to use sports as a tool for character change, our character is changing. Sports shape our habits of attention, they occupy our time and form our affections, they provide opportunities to sit in discomfort and strain. Sports captivate us and outshine other commitments, sometimes worthier commitments. And because of their practice-based structure, in sports we participate in intentional repetition. Athletic practice constitutes the perfect laboratory for habit formation for good and for ill. So sports form us regardless of whether we intend for them to do so. I started with an example of constructive character change, growth and resilience and patience, which resulted from navigating a setback. However, negative changes can happen too. You don't have to look very far at the highest levels of sport in the NFL or FIFA or the National Hockey League or the NBA to see evidence of bad behavior and vice. Considering those athletes have the most athletic experience, we might wonder whether we might be formed for ill in our daily practice of sports. In June of 2021, I returned to ultramarathon racing after an extended time away. I had not raced since 2019 due to a combination of pregnancy with my first child and the COVID-19 pandemic. It was odd to have these two events coincide, one which changed my own life, becoming a mother, the other which changed everyone's lives, the pandemic. One event was wonderful, becoming a mother. The other event was a catastrophe, the pandemic. In 2020, there was an active public discourse about extending grace to one another in these unprecedented times, and I had to catch myself from thinking that everyone else had just had their first child too. We all adjusted to big change, new responsibilities. We were disrupted from our routines. We had to figure out where running fit into this new rhythm of life in the pandemic, or in the pandemic and new motherhood in my case. Anyway, that June, I returned to competition. I'm not sure if I expected to be the same person when the gun went off, but I was not. Physically, I was not where I wanted to be. For months, I put in solid training volume. I added speed work as the event approached, but then I developed a gait inefficiency in the late spring that lingered into the summer. In the weeks leading up to the race, things took a turn for the worse, and I felt askew almost right from the gun. Internally, I was not the same person either. My longest run leading up to the event was 14 miles, which is a paltry sum in the face of a 50K race. But being away from my family for long training runs felt selfish. I lacked the myopia or singularity of focus on performance that previously characterized my training, and I was not desperate to win to prove myself. In the race itself, when my hips tightened and I fell off pace at mile 9, I felt happy for the women who were running well rather than unhappy for myself. While these were constructive changes for the sake of a well-ordered life outside of sport, they made me a less successful performer on race day. It was only after stepping away from competition and subsequently re-entering the arena as a mom that I acquired a new perspective on my athleticism. To be clear, this need not be the case for everyone. There are ways to compete that are above reproach, but my own competitiveness was partially sustained by selfishness, a preoccupation with my own interests and training, and perhaps envy toward my competitors, perceiving their gains as my own loss. And these character traits were reinforced by the competitive structure. They supported my performance objectives. They made me better at my job as a runner. They also made me a worse neighbor, citizen, and friend. The point is, potentially sports can form us in accordance with virtue, but it will not necessarily do so. So how do we use sports to form us for good? So what is a virtue? Some definitions. A virtue is an excellence. It's a character trait that makes someone a good instance of their kind as a human being. Virtues are constituted by fitting thoughts, actions, and feelings, and they're characterized as often involving a kind of ease or automaticity in their performance. What this means is that the virtuous person does not do good deeds through a force of will, through gritted teeth. They love the right things, they think fitting thoughts, and they act accordingly. You can probably name several virtues because these are words that we commonly employ to praise others. Examples include honesty, patience, generosity, and bravery. I wanted to point out these definitional things because sometimes I think that virtues have an odd reputation in our culture. Like oftentimes I will say virtue and what people will hear is self-righteousness or sanctimony or scrupulosity or no fun, right? And strictly speaking, these things are not right. First of all, scrupulosity, sanctimony, self-righteousness, those are vices, so that's not the goal. But do you know what are virtues? We have peace, we have joy, even wittiness is a virtue too. So the idea that it's no fun to be virtuous is not right. Also, for the Christians out there, Kierkegaard has this line that no one can laugh quite like a saint. And why is that? Because the saint is disemburdened from having to save himself, right? And so you can meet his incongruities, his inconsistencies, any kind of infelicities, and know that, you know, the work has been done on his behalf, right? And that kind of frees you up to meet things with a kind of levity and lightness. So virtue, they are fun. It's just kind of like a reputational issue. Virtues are a kind of quality that we want. So why do we want them? One reason we want virtues is that virtues are often described as constitutive features of flourishing, and we can see why. An example is that if I can persevere on a task, such as homework, or in relationships, or in completing a work project, I can self-govern. I can choose good ends, and I can see them through to completion. I'm better positioned to flourish because I'll not get in my own way. Or if I have virtuous anger, then I'm angry at the right things, at the right times, in the right ways. I perceive injustices adequately and respond suitably. All other things equal, I'm better positioned to flourish than someone who consistently has tantrums or is marked by a raging temper that doesn't match the reality of a situation. I like to think of vices as being akin to cavities. Even if you have one, compromises the integrity of the whole mouth. Vices erode our moral condition in fairly comprehensive ways that impact our flourishing. There are also civic reasons for virtue, that we're better neighbors or friends if we're excellent. For example, if I'm a liar, there are personal ramifications, but lying also has costs for the people in my life. Alternatively, if I'm honest or I'm just, my community benefits. And there are athletic reasons for virtue. Last year, I watched the Super Bowl. I have low football literacy, but I assume that something has gone right when they're dancing in the end zone. But in the few minutes I watched, something stood out. The televised broadcast detailed the actions on the field in terms of strategy, yards gained, and ball movement, but it also praised the players' virtues, their patience, their perseverance, their courage, the excellences of character that supported their ability to play well. This is because character matters even for performance reasons. The same thing happens in marathons. A couple of years ago, the New York City Marathon was won by Sharon Lokedi and Evans Chibet, and in the headlines, their victories were attributed to discipline and patience, respectively. Certainly, there are plenty of better reasons to care about character than athletic performance, but if you're concerned with character for no other reason, you should know that sports are not morally neutral. There are many cases in which virtues also support athletic performance. Finally, there are theological reasons to acquire virtues, to honor God, to know God, or to see God more clearly. Consider pride. Martin Luther describes this condition as incurvatus in se, man as turned in on himself. If you're so preoccupied with your own interests, as I said was true of myself in my early days of racing, you're in an epistemically poor position. You're morally shaped like a comma. Your attention is bent inward, and you can't see others clearly. You can't see God clearly. So we want to develop virtues. Thankfully, sports can be fruitfully employed for this purpose. So methods. Imagine you're sitting in a chair learning about perseverance. You learn that it means continuing to do what you're already doing or staying in place toward good ends. This sounds easy. How could staying in place be hard? But perseverance is certainly not easy. Remaining on task, particularly in pursuit of arduous goods, is difficult. In fact, it's one of the most difficult things that you can learn to do. Imagine instead that you learn about perseverance at running practice. While running, you're under no misconception that perseverance is easy. You feel the difficulty of this virtue in your legs and in your lungs. The difficulty commands your attention. In your weaker moments, you might prefer to do anything else rather than stay in place. This is one of the most valuable features of running for developing perseverance. The difficulty of the virtue is made obvious to us. Prior to and during my time in graduate school, I taught and I coached cross country at a small classical school where teaching virtue was curricular. We had explicit objective to help form learners to develop the virtues, and we did that in the classroom and in the athletic department. The classwork mattered in that we equipped students with virtue terms or a grammar of morality. Having the language of virtue and vice is like being given spectacles so we can better see ourselves and others. But in the classroom, I noticed that the virtues sounded easy, and at track practice, they felt hard. We could experience the character gap between ourselves and that excellence, and we recognized that we fell short. So this is the first reason why sports aid in virtue formation. Sports acquaint you with the difficulty of excellence. Having a good character is not easy. The second reason is practice. So virtues are a kind of acquired disposition, and they're developed in ways that are akin to developing other habits by intentional repetition. Aristotle writes that men become builders by building and lyre players by playing the lyre. So too, we become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, and so forth. So for example, if you want to become more just, you just have to practice being just until it defines you in a stable way. If you want to be more courageous, you need to rise to suitable risks again and again until it's a habit and you no longer have to think about doing that. This takes the guesswork out of character development. For virtues, you have to do them to be them. You need practice. This means that virtue development has a special kinship with practice-based activities such as music and sports. In music, you run scales or you practice a new piece of music again and again until you can reliably perform it with a kind of automaticity and ease. In soccer or basketball, the same thing occurs. You intentionally act in ways that approximate excellence. You try to get better through drills and scrimmages until performing the excellent action is your first impulse. So if you think about the riders in the Tour de France, it's not like they're thinking, push the pedal, push the pedal, push the pedal. There's a kind of automaticity, right? We can incorporate virtue development into this structure. An example is this. I often assign my athletes hill repeats during cross-country season. I gave them a physical goal, such as pacing or a set number of repetitions to complete, and the character objective was internal to the physical goal. I had some athletes who were reckless. They took unwarranted risks in workouts and would take off at an unsustainable pace. And I had other athletes who feared discomfort of any variety. They'd start runs too conservatively and not rise to worthy risks. For the reckless ones, I assigned speed limits to help constrain their thumos to correct toward courage. And for the cowardly, I assigned them quick early paces on the hills, urging them to press harder and find comfort in the feelings of strain and instability. These were opposite prescriptions based on their natural dispositions to help them correct toward the virtue. Aristotle uses this image of warped lumber. You have like a piece of wood and it's warped in one way, and the carpenter straightens it by pulling in the direction that opposes its natural warp. Had I given one virtue prescription, urging every athlete to take more risks in the way that we sometimes misconstrue the virtue of courage as being fearless, having no fear or something like that, instead of fitting fear concerning risks, it would have helped the cowardly, but it would have moved the reckless runners further from the virtue. So you have to know your athletes to advise them adequately. The warped lumber approach was how I coached them in perseverance as well. Most were irresolute and needed prodding to persist toward strain, but a few were intransigent. They were willing to press their bodies past discomfort into injury. It was important that I advise these athletes differently. Also, it may seem odd to incorporate virtue formation either explicitly or implicitly into athletic development. My responses to this worry are twofold. First, regardless of whether we're using sports to form good character, we are forming something. Again, sports is not a morally neutral space. So if on a regular basis in athletic practice, your pacing is imprudent, or your desires are intemperate, or your inclinations are uncourageous, and your motivations are awry, you're practicing bad qualities that are likely to carry into the rest of your life. There's no retreat from character formation in sports. It's happening. So your choices are either form character well, or form character without any intention or plan and hope that it works out okay. Second, while institutions such as public schools today often self-describe as being out of the business of character education, athletics is a space where there's not just tolerance of, but also an expectation that participants will be transformed through the activity. Often when parents explain why they register a child for Little League or youth football, or even register themselves for a local 5K or workout classes, they do say things about physical health, but they will also say things about growth and discipline, resilience, or other changes pertaining to character. There's little resistance to that idea. So character change is an attractive feature of sports, and when used well, it can provide an important and rare opportunity for participants to be refined physically and morally. Goal setting. A third way athletics can be used for virtue formation is through being intentional about what excellence means. In sports, we discuss goals often. We reflect on what it might mean for us to be successful, and this is valuable. Outside of sports, people often forget to do this, except perhaps maybe once a year for New Year's resolutions. It seems like we're all on a collective achievement escalator to nowhere without intention or coherence in our striving. Alternatively, we might have a vision of some grand objectives, but no plan in place for how to arrive. In sports, we set clear goals. We talk about why they matter, and we make action plans for how to bring them to fruition. We can incorporate virtues into this plan as well. So for example, my goal is to run a mile at this pace, or I want to make it to the state championships this year as an individual. Alongside performance goals, we can set character objectives such as to lean into gratitude for my excellent teammates rather than begrudging their successes. Or I can aim to be less pusillanimous. That's the vice of being small-souled. And I can do so by striving in ways that are commensurate with my abilities. I don't have to be mousy about what I'm capable of or deflect compliments. I can aim high with humility and gratitude and acknowledge dependence on the people in my life who make my striving possible, and that can be my character goal. It's important to set virtue goals because often we meticulously measure and plan for athletic performance goals or work objectives or whatever other part of our lives command our attention. You wake up with a plan. And then when it comes to our character, there is no plan. We throw up our hands and just hope that it'll all work out. But character matters, who we are matters, and we have agency to improve ourselves in that respect. When I coached cross country, my team would decide on a season, virtue, and focus, and we did just one because trying to improve in every respect at once is overwhelming. It can make you feel scattered. One year we worked on courage. Another year we worked on joy, which Thomas Aquinas calls a consequence of love. Joy is a kind of buoyancy or fixity in our good purpose, and it makes a person despair resistant through trials. This is a good one for runners because plenty of reasons to despair present themselves over the course of a long run. We needed joy or to be tethered to our good purpose to make it through training. At the end of the season, I gave out awards for MVP and most improved, kind of the standard performance relevant honors, but I also gave out an award for the athlete who best exemplified the virtue for reinforcement. We talked about virtue goals all season. Not just at the beginning, we evaluated progress with respect to the virtue and reinforced that objective at the end, because what you pay attention to grows. This leads to the fourth way that sports can lend to virtue development, and that is through coaching. So during one of my first seasons of coaching, our women's team was seeded to perform in the state championships pretty well. So we set the goal of finishing in the top 3. Deep into the race, we were positioned to do so until the plan went awry. A girl from a different team fell as she approached the finishing chute. One of my athletes saw her fall. Rather than run past her, she stopped to assist the other runner to her feet and then helped her proceed slowly down the final straightaway. While this happened, streams of runners were passing my runner to the finish, such that she was no longer a scoring member of the team. And then in the official results, her name did not appear. She was officially disqualified for assisting the other girl because a lot of states have an anti-Good Samaritan rule. You're not supposed to touch each other during races. So we didn't place at all in the state championships that year. This is an interesting situation as a coach. Often the character goals we set in distance running support good performance. For example, perseverance is an excellence of our person, which is also an asset on the cross-country course. But this was a situation in which our performance goals and our character goals were opposed. Being a good person, something I told my team I cared about a great deal, was detrimental to placing well. So in that moment, I had to check my heart and assess my responses. Of course, our performances mattered to us. We worked really hard that season, but character mattered more. And I wanted to show my primary allegiance to that. That season, I talked about virtue a lot, but ultimately, it didn't matter if I stated even repeatedly that I cared about virtue above performance. If I only praised outcomes and mourned losses or exclusively paid attention to their successes, then my athletes would know what truly mattered to me. For those who hold the positions of coaches, parents, or exemplars, my disclaimer is that you have to actually care about virtue if you want to encourage meaningful character work. You have to care about virtue more than you care about successes. This can be difficult for a coach because typically the incentives for coaching are performance-oriented. Coaches are often hired and fired on the basis of their wins and losses. They're often financially compensated for performance successes, such as wins at the conference or national level, rather than for the long-term flourishing of athletes, their contributions to the community, or their dispositions toward charity or integrity. To care about character in ways not immediately connected to performance may mean compromising one's position as a coach. These incentives are wrong. They're wrong because very few athletes will ever go on to compete at the professional level, but all athletes will be citizens, neighbors, and friends. For all athletes, character matters. So when performance and moral character conflict, character should be the greater concern. And 5, the final way sports can be used for virtue development is admiration. Sports put excellence on display in a way that evokes admiration. Admiration can provoke us to be likewise excellent, but we can't just admire. We actually have to do something about it. On September 25th of 2022, Kenyan runner Eliud Kipchoge broke the men's marathon world record for the second time at the Berlin Marathon. Mastery in any domain is mesmerizing, and this certainly was. Kipchoge ran 2 hours, 1 minute, and 9 seconds, or a staggering 4 minutes and 37 seconds per mile. If you're like me, you've never run a single mile that fast. If you're like me, then by comparison, Kipchoge runs like a cheetah, and you run like a lion. A sea lion. Kipchoge has a stunning reputation for long-standing mastery of the sport, and for doing so, as far as we can tell, above reproach. He's the consummate exemplar for distance running. Talented, humble, affable, perseverant, and brave. I could learn a lot from him. But after Kipchoge's performance, my temptation was to be amazed, of course, but then to put him up on a pedestal or to set him aside as an outlier without ever bringing his achievement to bear on my own comparatively meager athleticism. I wanted to chalk his achievement up to natural ability far beyond my own. Since by natural province, Kipchoge is exceptional, then I don't have to feel bad about how unremarkable I am, by contrast. Friedrich Nietzsche describes it this way: with respect to the excellent person, only if we think of him as being very remote from us, as a miraculum, does he not aggrieve us. Admiration is a powerful emotion. We're imitative creatures. And admiration is an emotion germane to being a fan, which is a central feature of sports. We see great people, we give them a stage, and we watch. We appreciably perceive or celebrate what they accomplish. When we admire others, we develop a clearer sense of what excellence is in fine-grained terms. We can see also how far away we are from being likewise excellent, such as the gap between Kipchoge and me. We can be motivated to close the gap between the admired person and ourselves. We can level up, and this is morally productive fandom. We can learn a lot from great athletes in the sports. Certainly we need to admire with a critical eye. We should never assume that the athlete is above reproach in every or even most respects. However, from athletics, we learn about what it looks like to persevere or to be brave or to be a good teammate or to be diligent. The key is, though, we actually have to do something to close the gap between ourselves and the admired person. So we can't just feel admiring feelings and then carry on with our lives unchanged. We can't just perform affiliative actions, such as wearing a branded jersey or maybe the same shoes, right? Because this has no moral merit for us. What we have to do is we have to practice the good that we see in the other person, just in our own context. Kierkegaard makes the distinction between mere admirers and imitators. Mere admirers have these positive feelings toward the admired person, yet they do nothing about it. Imitators take action. They appreciably perceive the Eliud Kipchoge or Simone Biles or LeBron James, and they put on the excellences themselves. So to summarize, I described 5 ways that we can use sports as a laboratory for virtue. That sports demonstrate the difficulty of the virtue, that excellence is hard and we don't possess it. Second, providing practice space. We can use intentional repetition to improve. The third is goal setting, being explicit about what excellent means and then drawing ourselves closer. The fourth was coaching, right? Presenting an occasion to be directed by others toward what is good and choiceworthy. And the fifth is admiration, to learn from excellent athletes and put on virtues ourselves. I'm going to conclude with the unsavory, which is limitations of this approach. There are limitations. So for starters, not all virtues are relevant to sports. So if you want to grow in gentleness or intellectual fair-mindedness, things like football or basketball might not be the best approach to work on those virtues in particular. They don't really lend themselves to that practice. So we need other strategies to develop those virtues. Additionally, sports sometimes permit us to act in ways that are structurally praiseworthy, but not actually virtuous. For example, we may be motivated to perform well for the wrong reasons. Someone might persevere to garner praise or to make their competition feel small. Sometimes we compete from envy, which Kierkegaard calls the vice of unhappy self-assertion. In fact, envy is so entwined in our cultural imagination of competition that we define competition as such. Maybe because I was a professional athlete and an ethicist, people often ask me if I'm competitive all the time. It's kind of like a gotcha question. And I often ask them if they could clarify what they mean by competitive. And they'll say things like, well, do you have to win? Are you undone by loss, right? And strictly speaking, those are not competition. To compete is to strive together. What they're describing is the vice of envy, right? Which is so entwined in our imaginations that we are defining competition in that way. And that motivation is not conducive to virtue. Rather, envy is a vice akin to theft. It either wins or it explains away the other person's victory. It never commends a competitor and it steals their moments. Envy erodes community. Considering there are so many bitter rivalries in high-level sport, it seems likely that envy hides in plain sight. It's probably a vice that is in some ways conducive to performance. Alternatively, we might compete at a high level, but do so from pride. I spoke about pride earlier as being turned in on oneself like a comma or preoccupied with your own interests. Pride is a vice that misconstrues its value. It sees itself as more important than it really is, so pride must win to maintain its presumed status as superior. Pride's greatest secret is that it's always under threat. There are better reasons to compete well. Some are stewardship of our abilities, supporting teammates, or honoring God. Curiosity is a good reason to press hard in training and competitions, and all of those motivations are conducive to virtue, but good reasons to perform are not usually supplied by the sport itself. In general, figuring out your purpose or the reason for your training, your motivation, will require that you reflect on sources of meaning outside of the sport. A second way in which sports sometimes permit us to act in ways that are structurally praiseworthy yet not quite virtuous is that we might commit to the wrong ends. For example, maybe I persevere, or I exhibit constancy, I overcome obstacles in ways that seem impressive to onlookers, but I do so at the cost of people in my life who really need me in the moment. Or I override my physical limits to my detriment and I sustain injury. Or I neglect worthier concerns to commit to training. I always tell my athletes, not all finish lines are good ones. Sporting culture often praises success, whatever the cost. It praises suffering with bravado without evaluating what the suffering is for. But performance is only a virtue if it's committed to good ends. We sports people should be alert to these concerns. Sports might redirect our attention for ill or orient us to the wrong ends. It does us no good to be naive about that. Aristotle writes that the actions from or through which any virtue is produced are the same as those through which it's destroyed. As you become a good builder from building well, you become a bad one from building badly. You have to make sure we're assessing our practice and forming the right things. So sports are not a panacea for forming a good character. They're certainly not meant to be a standalone strategy for virtue formation. And you can rely on other character development methods, such as edifying friendships, daily journaling, mentors, reading great books, serving others, accepting praise or blame, practicing spiritual disciplines, working on virtues in other areas of life. But sports are a good place to start. From sports, we learn agency with respect to improvement. We learn what it means to have a daily practice and becoming better. We learn what it looks like to set a goal and draw ourselves closer to meeting it on a regular basis. We learn what excellence looks like, and we learn that we're not yet excellent ourselves. If used well, sports can be productively employed as a laboratory for virtue. Thank you.
Thank you. That was so wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, I have like 100 questions. I think we all want to be virtuous people. And you've laid out that to be a virtuous person, we're going to have to practice, we're going to have to persevere. There's going to have to be commitments that we make in our lives. So when we talk about the kind of people we become is because of the practices we love. And I was thinking, wow, I like to watch TV at night. And I'm thinking, well, what is that? How is that forming me? What would you advise? How do we take inventory of our practices? Because they do shape us. What do you suggest to people?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, we do this kind of reflective practice once a year, usually on New Year's. And sometimes we get advice from the people in our lives, like, can you speak honestly about how I'm doing? And generally having that, like having someone speak into your life, someone who wills your good, someone who loves you, I think is a really valuable way of assessing your practices. But I think, honestly, I mean, when I talk to my students, like, because I give them moral challenges on a regular basis, like, hey, use your phone a little bit less, or throw a dinner party for your friends, like things like this, they generally, no one has to tell them that, oh, you are using your phone too much.
Right.
Or, you know, you're a bit impatient. Like you can experience these ills about yourself on a regular basis. I think we get kind of natural feedback for that often in our context. And really what they want is a moment to take the initiative to improve in certain respects. And so that's what I encourage them to do. Just start with the messy rebuilding of the habit. Maybe have someone who holds you accountable to it, but just get started.
Well, it's about having honest friends and family, actually. And people who don't get any feedback in their lives are probably at risk for having habits that have gone amok.
I think that's right. And it's one of the things that I worry about, right? So there's a lot of literature right now about people spending more time on their devices, and the consequence of that being the folding of social institutions and fewer in-person friendships and less face-to-face time with the people they love. And I think that the people in your life are often an occasion by which you grow and mature, and so it's kind of a lost opportunity in that respect.
You are a parent, and I would think, sometimes I think, oh, when I have like something to repair in the house, I think, oh, I wish I were married to somebody who was really good at repairing. Now, I happen to be married to a pediatrician, which is like an A-team skill, right? Because you can travel with your doctor when you go on vacation. But I would think that traveling and being married to a philosopher who thinks about virtue would really give you a leg up on your parenting.
You might think that.
Yeah, I do.
I mean, depending on the day you ask me, sometimes I'm like, oh, got this figured out. And then the next day, I'm like, I have no idea what's going on. Right? It's interesting to raise little people who, they're not really reasons responsive. You're trying to get them to, think about their emotions and respond well and things like that. And it's just a difficult process. Being human is messy. And I often tell them, I'm a mess too. I apologize to them all the time. And I see it as something that we're working on together, not something that I'm fully just importing in them. I'm working on my patience, and I'm learning in the same way that they are. I would say the biggest thing in helping someone to grow in virtue is to live an admirable life and show them what's beautiful, show them what's good. And thankfully, I'm married to a wonderful man who does that really well. And I'm really grateful for him in particular for modeling a good life and having integrity in small things, because I know it's going to impact my children. Yeah, this integrity in small things, and we'll take a look at, I'm going to ask you a question about someone like Bobby Knight, for instance, right? And Bobby Knight was sort of regaled as a great coach. He won lots of games, but also he was kicked out of games. He threw things. He wasn't an exemplar at all. And so how do you, when performance and character pull in different directions, how do you explain that to people? What should we do? Do we ignore it all? Do we throw it all out? Do we use critical judgment? Yeah, it's a really good question and kind of a timely question. I think that there's a lot of people seem to be talking about this in the moment, just with regard to people we've held as leaders in the country, in the past, historical leaders, and there's a messiness to them. Yeah. And what do you do with that? Do you just ignore them, or do you deal with them in a more sensitive way? I mean, insofar as we're humans, we are all a mess, right? And the closer you get to someone, the closer you inspect their legacy, the more that you'll notice things, are not as tidy as you once were. And I don't think that the response is to have a naive approach to those people. I think we should be able to evaluate the messiness and not just either cast out or accept. There are good and praiseworthy things that we should be able to name and imitate, while also holding together what it means to be human. And I mean, that's something even as a teacher, when I'm dealing with students, anytime I'm surprised that someone cheats, it's well, why am I surprised? Right. These are humans, right? And so having a rich anthropology and saying we're bad, we have these bad things, we have these good things, we're really a mixed bag. I think that shows us just how incredible the work of Christ is on our behalf. Yes. When we're looking at different people. But I think it helps to be able to name the good thing and not expect that people are going to be excellent in all or even most respects. Yeah, I think that's a really great, fair, and balanced answer. And it also allows us to, like you said, the way that Christ looks at us, right? He really wants the things that are not going well improved. He wants us to be more sanctified as we go along. And he still loves us so dearly, even in this messiness. Did your faith at all play a part in the subject matter that you've picked up to study for your life? Yes. I mean, one thing is just like, because of my faith, I'm convicted that the way we live our lives matter, right? So if I'm supposed to be discipled by Christ, what does that mean? It should have a very real bearing. There should be fruit in my life that testifies to the person that I love the most. And I kind of compare it to, like, in sports, my life testifies to my love of running. Like, I have a watched hand. I'm, like, built in certain ways that, demonstrate that I, have been training for years. And every morning I wake up and do certain things. And my life as a Christian should testify to that love in the same way. So, like, there should be very real things, real changes in my life that show my primary allegiance, the thing that I love, in the way that my life testifies to lesser loves.
I like that you said the word building your life. Makes me think about each of us have the discretion of how we use our time. And as an ultramarathon and a runner, you built into things in your life that would help you be really good at being a runner. But what you're saying here is that how intentional can we be about the building blocks we have for that primary allegiance? Like, what would you review on a yearly basis that would say, yeah, you say that you love Christ, surely, but how are you organizing your life in order to advance that primary alliance?
Yeah. Like if you had like a spreadsheet, the way that we do with our training. What are the fruits there? And it's hard. Like, how do you measure, I guess, like generosity of time, things like that. How loved my kids feel? Am I actually loving the poor? Am I generous with my attention and things like that? Because like if that's not my central love, then what you're going to find is that kind of incurvatus in se, like the sort of turning in on yourself, preoccupation with your own interests. So I'm going to switch a little bit subject here to sports, and what any of us who do watch TV, we see sports gambling. And I think, oh my goodness, what a corruption on a area of life that already is fighting vices and virtues, right? Give us your take on how did that happen that we were so now enthralled with gambling and sports? Good question. I mean, there are better and worse ways to be a fan. Morally good fandom, what does that mean? Well, one, it's not going to be this kind of desperate escapism. Another thing is like, it's going to be the good thing in your life, but not the ultimate thing. And it's going to be like, there's some writing on fandom that talks about how in sports, you are able to invest in something over which you have minimal control. And that's a kind of fruitful thing, because a lot of love is like that. Like, you love your kids and you send them to school and you don't know what's happening while they're there, but you're invested and you love them. You do that kind of diligent work, and you can do that as a fan. Money, anytime money touches the sport, it seems like there are lots of perverse incentives. I don't know why people enjoy gambling, but I think it's like the same sort of, why do they gamble in other respects, like trying to find some sort of thrill. But yeah, I do worry about, putting resources there and paying kind of outsized attention to, particularly like athletes are in many cases, and you're so invested in how some 20-year-old is performing on any day-to-day. You're mad at them when it doesn't work out. It doesn't seem very productive to me. No, I think as a nation, we have to make some really interesting choices. I also think that, for instance, with gambling, it seems like a vice is really easy to get into deep and fast, and the virtue isn't. Is that true? Well, yeah, I think, right. So what does it mean to be virtuous? It means to love the right things, to think fitting thoughts, to act accordingly, having fitting motivations, and doing this kind of across situationally, so over the course of your life. That is exceedingly difficult.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a lot easier to not be excellent. Now, my only resistance to that question is I think like full on vice is also really hard to do. It's hard to will bad things consistently across situations for all the bad reasons. I think most people are probably in what Christian Miller calls mixed character. And so in some ways you are virtue tracking and in others you are not. In some ways you're more inclined toward vices and we just like have ample room to improve. I think there are some people who certainly are vicious and there are some people who are certainly virtuous. And then most of us are somewhere in between.
Yeah. That's another really balanced way to look at it, because you could say, well, I couldn't help myself, right? And you say, well, maybe you can help yourself. So no pain, no gain. Is that true?
Oh my goodness. Any of these like social media or back of the t-shirt slogans, like I think it should, the back of the shirt, it shouldn't say no pain, no gain. It should say some pains are edifying, but not all of them. And you should maybe investigate whether, whether this suffering is actually just your own imprudence, right? Like a more fine grained assessment. We tend to speak of suffering as though it makes you tough and all suffering is just one kind of thing. And I think that there should be discussions about what you're suffering for and how you're suffering. Like certain forms of like there's a way in which forming virtue itself is, if not suffering, like a little bit discomfort, right? Like learning to be patient, for example, means sitting with uneasy feelings, and learning to be just means you're trying to muddle through situations of injustice, right? And so there's a kind of suffering there. But I think this kind of bravado around suffering that is poor stewardship of your body is something that is really dangerous. And so that rhetoric makes me uncomfortable.
Yes, it's so quick, so common, so memorable and probably unhealthy.
Yes.
Yeah. What, when you think of limits, a lot of us actually resist limits, right? We think, oh, I can't do that like I used to, or it's lamentable. But why are limits actually a gift?
Yeah, good question. And I think, we see some people resisting limits in that way. And then often in sports, we see the opposite, which is this kind of limitless rhetoric. Like, I can do anything, And the reason that limits matter is that these are the defining constraints of human nature. And so some of them are bodily. And why should you care about your bodily limits? Because you only get one body, right? And if you are overriding pain sensations to accomplish things, that's dangerous. But other limits in our lives are the people we love. So it's often the case that when I head out to run, the first limit I'm not likely to step over is physical. It's actually my family, like time that I could spend with the people in my life who need me. And so thinking more about the structure of the human, what a good human life is, and what you're willing to push and what you're not willing to push. Like, there are moral limits. There are things we ought not do in a good life. So taking those limits seriously, looking upon them happily, as an athlete and a person, I think is really valuable.
You have really helped us think today about what it means to live a good life. We're really blessed by your scholarship and by your dedication and the way that you've taken your love of running and helped us apply it in a bigger and broader way. So sometimes I wonder if academics think, well, is my scholarship, really, what does it do for us? And I want you to know that your scholarship around this is really a blessing to the rest of us.
Thank you.
And I would like to end with a benediction for you. And then audience, Michael and I also have a benediction for us as an audience as we close this season after 10 wonderful experiences. But Sabrina, let me say this. You're only starting the second semester, it's early. So go now into the weeks ahead, not merely to do, but to discern, not merely to endure, but to grow in wisdom. And may God grant you the grace of an examined life that you write about, the patience to attend to your limits, the courage to practice virtue when it's costly, and the humility to know that faithfulness matters more than speed. May the work of your hands, the habits of your days, and the loves that shape your life be ordered to what is good and true and life-giving. And as you run your own race in study and labor and care for others in quiet perseverance, may you do so with endurance marked by hope, discipline shaped by love, and joy rooted not in achievement, but in the faithful presence of God who goes with you. So go in peace to live wisely, to practice what you love, and to glorify God in every step along the way. Thank you for being here. Let's thank her for her good work. So you stay here. You can just stay here. And we're going to come over here and read a final benediction for all of you and who are in the audience, but also everyone online. We have had a marvelous 10 days of learning and discovery and growth. And so this is not by accident. This is created by the God who loves us so deeply. So we're going to do it alternating. And so as we come to the close of these 10 days, we give thanks.
For minds awakened and hearts stretched, for questions asked with courage and humility, for curiosity that lead not to division, but to deeper understanding.
We give thanks for voices that caused and called us to wholeness, for reminders of our shared humanity, for music and stories that cross boundaries, for landscapes that taught us stewardship, for truth spoken plainly, and for hope offered honestly.
We give thanks for community, for the gift of gathering across difference, for listening as an act of respect, and for learning as a shared responsibility.
And we give thanks for Calvin University, for its faithful offering of these lectures to the world, an invitation to think deeply, to engage generously, and to love wisdom as a gift from God.
Now, as we go, may what we have heard take root in daily life. May insight become practice, learning become service, and wonder become commitment.
And may God bless you in the questions you carry, the communities that you serve, the lives that you shape, and the flourishing of the world God so loves. Let's go in peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.